Hello, and welcome back to the world of Wysteria. We will now continue with part 2 of chapter 12. The three dreamers hurriedly navigated through the crowd and soon reached the front of the clothing store. Will opened the door, allowing the girls to enter the shop first, then stepped inside and closed it behind him. "Wow," said Emily, looking around the interior of the shop. "It's different." Will smiled. "Yes, it is." "When did you do this?" she asked. "Just now, on the way over here," he said. Though the space looked the same on the outside, the inside had changed significantly. It was much larger, twice as large, and had a wider selection of clothing. "How fun," said Charlotte, who had already walked over to a display of hats and was busy trying them on. "What are you going to wear?" "Nothing too fancy," Emily replied, as she began looking through the dresses. "Something comfortable, something I can play in." After spending a few minutes searching through the racks of clothing, they each selected their outfits for the day. Unlike the more formal Victorian attire she'd worn the last time they played dress-up, Emily settled on a simple, loose-fitting white blouse and a long, dark blue skirt. Will also made a casual choice: a white shirt with full sleeves, brown pants, and soft brown leather boots laced up the front. The two of them, now properly attired, stood at the front of the store waiting for Charlotte to join them. She soon appeared, dressed in relatively conventional clothing, a full blouse, much like the one Emily was wearing, though dark red and with a more revealing neckline, and a long black skirt, which she'd hiked up and tucked into her belt on one side, revealing short black boots and red stockings. "How's this?" she asked them. "Very nice," said Emily. "A bit devilish, perhaps." "Perfect," Charlotte declared with a sly grin. "Yes," thought Will, "she'll turn a few heads." After emerging from the shop, looking more in tune with their surroundings, the three of them stood near the door, taking in the sights and sounds of the celebration. "Very nice work," said Emily. "Actually, they did it," he replied. "What do you mean?" she asked. "The people of the town. They did all of this." He then described, in brief, the process by which the town had been transformed. "And it really did seem that they were doing it by themselves," he said. "I swear they came up with some things that I never would have thought of." Both girls were quiet for a moment. "That's very interesting, Will," Emily responded. She then turned to Charlotte, who was staring straight ahead with a faraway look in her eye. "Do you see what I mean?" "Yes," said Charlotte. "I do. He's a special young man, isn't he?" "I've always wondered." "Always wondered what?" asked Emily. "I've always wondered what you meant when you said Will was talented," she answered. "Now I understand. Actually," she continued, changing the subject, "I think I want to go exploring, if you two don't mind." "Please do," said Will. He found Charlotte intriguing and was glad Emily had invited her to the festival. But he did want some time alone with his sweetheart. "Go on," said Emily. "Have fun. If you feel like getting away from the crowd, there's a garden over there," Will told her, motioning toward the southern gate. "Yes, it's beautiful," added Emily. "You should take a look." "Okay," she said, giving Emily a hug. "I'll see you guys in a bit." Charlotte turned to go, but caught herself. She faced Will, lowered her head, and made a slow, reverential curtsy, followed by a coy smile and another wink. Then she moved off into the crowd. "So that's Charlotte," he said, taking Emily's arm as they began strolling east along the storefronts. "Yes," said Emily. "Quite a character, huh? She's fun, a bit kooky sometimes, but actually very smart. She's definitely more dream savvy than I am. When we first met, I was pretty green. She taught me a lot, mostly practical tips on traveling, unlike the more theoretical things I learned from Jeremy." "Do those two know each other?" he asked. "Charlotte and Jeremy? Yes," she replied. "Actually, it was Charlotte who introduced me to him. She'd stumbled upon his world, which is hard to find, incidentally, on one of her explorations, as she calls them." "Explorations?" "Yes, Charlotte refers to herself as an explorer rather than a traveler." "Is there a difference?" he inquired. "It depends who you ask," she answered. "There are many different terms used for classifying dreamers and their activities. Some people can be very particular about the terminology, but there's no official dictionary. There are certain conventions, but it's largely personal preference. I think of traveler as a general term, whereas explorer and tourist refer to different types of travelers." "Like the term drifter?" Will asked. "Exactly," she said. "Although drifter could be considered a subcategory, since that term is related to the person's behavior, specifically bad behavior. A drifter is really a naughty tourist, one might say." "So what exactly is an explorer then?" "As opposed to a traveler, an explorer seeks out new worlds, particularly strange or out-of-the-way places, whether or not those worlds are a vibrational match to them," she explained. "It's more difficult than conventional traveling. It's not enough just to have an adventurous personality. You also need to possess, or be taught, certain skills." They'd reached the northeast corner of the square and were just turning south when Emily suddenly stopped. "Wow," she said. "That's new." Will followed her eyes, which were fixed on the clock tower. "I can't believe I didn't notice it before this," she remarked. "Has it been here the whole time?" "Yes, I added it yesterday," he told her. "It's part of a bigger project." "Bigger project?" "It's complicated," he said, looking at the hands on the clock. "I'll explain, but later. It's not time yet." "That's fine," said Emily. "We should forget we're dreamers for a while and just enjoy the party. Come on, let's mingle." They spent the next few hours taking a leisurely but thorough tour of the square, during which, on Emily's suggestion, Will chatted with some of the townspeople. Emily believed it would help him feel less distanced from them. And in fact, it did. Even though Will had always felt very much at home in Wysteria, he was keenly aware of the fundamental difference between him and the rest of the population. Even if they were no longer dependent on him for their existence, they were still his creations. He thought of them as real, perhaps even as alive, but they were not like him. He was the dreamer, and they were the dreamed. Though limited to small talk, mainly about the festival itself, the short conversations Will had with the people were revealing. Individuals with unique personalities and points of view emerged. And it made him wonder whether, aside from the manner of their birth, they really were so different from him. And thank you for joining me this evening. We will return very shortly with chapter 13.